serial killers should never be off the streets. They all should be locked up and the key thrown away. I don't think that there's no help for them. Teeny weeny component of a cell is buried in their cranium, and it is not going to go away unless there's some type of surgery that can be performed on those type of people.
Is there one of these killers that you think is doing the lion's share of the killing?
Yes, Darren Deon Vaughn.
Darren Deon Vann shocked the nation in 2014 when police arrested him for the murder of Africa Hardy in Hammond, Indiana. But what began as a single case quickly unfolded into something much darker. Vann confessed to killing at least 6 more women, leading investigators to his victims' remains in abandoned homes across Gary, Indiana, thereby earning him the nickname of the Gary Strangler. But is it possible that Darren could also be the Chicago Strangler? In his confession, Vann hinted that he had been killing for nearly 20 years and his style of killing matches with the MO of the Chicago Strangler. Many experts, like Thomas Hargrove, think that Darren could very well be responsible. Because many of the Chicago murders are near the train line, it's easy to imagine Darren boarding the train from Gary, getting out at a Chicago stop on the south and west sides, giving in to his killing impulse, then returning home to Gary. What's more is in his confession interviews with the police, Vann claims to have victims across multiple states.
And Darren Vaughn told police in Hammond, Indiana, he's made a lot of mistakes.
4 or 5 in California. How many in North Carolina?
1, because I ain't stayed long. Texas, I think there's 2. At least 2 in Milwaukee. And there's 3 in Minnesota. I'll say about 7 in Detroit.
How many in Chicago?
Chicago? A lot.
One of the goals of setting out to do this was to try and solve some of these murders. And so with many of the fingers pointing towards Darren Deon Vann, we sent him a letter and we reached out to the Indiana Department of Corrections portal in attempts to reach him. Now we have no idea if the letter that we sent to Wabash Correctional to Darren made it to him. Maybe it didn't make it past security. So we're still waiting for a response so that we can pursue those leads further. A theory of why Darren's claims of killing more women wasn't explored further is that Indiana investigators wanted to lock him away with certainty rather than complicate his case by making it federal. However, experts like Detective Mike Hammond would argue that Darren could not have possibly killed all these women. The Chicago Strangler is thought to have killed till 2018, and Darren, arrested in 2014, was already locked away in prison. And secondly, because of the multitude of DNA samples found in the victims, leading Mike to think that we are dealing with multiple killers. The problem is, with many of the victims being prostitutes, being found with multiple DNA samples is to be expected and just further complicates tracking down the killer. You had a conversation with Darren Deon Vann, who some say is the Chicago Strangler, or one of the guys responsible for most of the bodies. Tell me about your conversation with him.
He had no problem with talking about the girls he killed in Gary, Indiana, which is exactly 40 minutes from here. Gary, Indiana is across the street, basically, right? But when he talked about Chicago, he said he killed so many he can't remember. And to look at this man, this young man in his face, that was part of the armed services, that looked like he would even swat a fly, to tell you he don't know how many people he killed, it's sickening. And it hits me to the gut. I know, we're talking about 51, I know it's more than 85. There's no connection to all 85, but there's still 85 women that's been killed in Chicago.
We first detected him in Gary, Indiana, where he was responsible for most of a cluster of 15 murders of women. And then the algorithm signaled that there was a very similar cluster occurring in Chicago, a much larger cluster. And the Gary, Indiana murders go back to the 90s, but the cluster in Chicago started around 2001. And we think that's when Mr. Vaughn discovered the joys of public transit. We think he took the Chicago Transit Green Line into the city when he had what he called killing urges. Produced a map showing the body recovery sites of these 51. And you'll see a linear pattern of 9 or so victims that occurred right along the Green Line. He has been killing his whole adult life, and he has a difficult time establishing normal relations with women. He speaks to getting killing urges. In fact, you can see his confession at our website. When he gets killing urges, he can't afford his own home, so he was living with his brother and his brother's family. When he would get killing urges, he had to leave. He couldn't stay in the home and possibly harm members of his own family. So he would leave. He would walk around Gary, Indiana, or he would go further afoot. It was a very random murder. They were grabbed and usually killed close to where their bodies were found. Nothing very sophisticated in these murders, just opportunistic.
How sure are you that Darren Dion Van has claimed lives in Chicago?
Look at him straight in his eye. He's not lying. He killed so many women, he don't know how many. Now, do I think he killed all 51? No.
It would be nice to point the finger at Darren Dion Van, accuse him to be the likely suspect of all these murders, get some closure and move on. However, it is impossible that Darren did all these murders. There were 5 murders that happened between 2004 and 2005 that he couldn't have done because he was serving time in an Indiana jail. What he did was, in front of police, he threatened to kill his girlfriend by holding a gas can and lighter in one arm while the other arm was around her neck. There are an additional 5 murders from 2009 to 2013 that he couldn't have done because he was serving a 5-year prison sentence in Texas for a brutal sexual assault. So there are at least 10 murders from this period that Darren could not have done. This further supports Detective Hammond and Thomas Hargrove's theory that there are multiple killers involved, but unfortunately, it also further complicates this deadly mystery. When was the last time you were contacted by police regarding your mother's death?
I was never contacted. They contacted my grandmother one time, and it was for identification purposes. When I got older, I contacted them, and they didn't even know anything. They barely knew who she was, and said like, "Oh, the case is the file. We delete the files or something like that, or they don't carry the files."
What does that make you think?
They just don't care. Because I don't think it's a complex case. I mean, she was found somewhere where she stayed, where she frequently visited and hung out at. So, I mean, I don't feel like it should have been hard to find out, you know what I'm saying, who done it, but at least, like, gather like, some type of information as to what happened.
So some of the comments I've gotten is if all the victims were white ladies that were accountants or middle class, that the murders would have already been solved right now. But because a lot of the women are black women, minority women that are working the streets, no one cares, the cops aren't going to bother. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, so in general, Chicago is pretty low on their success rate of solving any kind of murder. It's like 20 or 30%. It's really low. I don't think it's necessarily what color you are. It's just that they know that a lot of those people have like left their homes or whatever. Their families used to them going on binges, missing, you know, so no one will be exactly looking for them right away.
So no one's really sure where they are anyways.
Yeah, and like a lot of people don't have families, so if they were to die, who's gonna know anyway?
Is your thought that your mom was got by the Chicago Strangler?
Part of me yes and no. Like a part of me feel like maybe it could have been somebody she knew, and then a part of me feel like it could have been a serial killer, Chicago Strangler.
So we've heard about the crimes Darren may have committed, but what do we know about who this guy is? Little about his childhood is known other than he grew up in Indiana, and in 1991 he enlisted in the Marine Corps but received an other than honorable discharge after only 2 years in the service. The specific reasons for his discharge have not been publicly disclosed. What we do know about Darren is this: he has a notable criminal background. However, there is something potentially disturbing that we uncovered. According to a confidential source, he has been arrested over 75 times. However, most of his rap sheet has been redacted. Why? With guys like Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy, we have enough information about them to make a Netflix series. But when it comes to Darren, there's barely any information out on his past on the internet, and what is documented has been censored. Why?
What were her injuries, if you don't mind me asking? Was she shot?
No, she was strangled and just beat up real bad to the point where it damaged her brain severely. She was on life support for 2 years before my grandfather decided to pull the plug.
I can't imagine what that's like, going into a room with a family member that you love. They're disfigured, they're beaten up, and having to... Kiana, so does this alley look familiar to you?
Yeah, it does.
And what's going through your head right now?
Just memories and stuff with my mom. These are my last memories with her. We used to stay down here and go to the grocery store across the street.
So you used to live close by?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess what's running through your guys' heads right now?
So I'm looking from a cold case perspective. What year would have been? What year was it?
99.
99.
Yeah.
So, you know, several time ago. So much of this has changed. I can see now about 10 video cameras. Probably weren't here at the time. There are probably buildings that were here, right, that were multi-unit buildings. So I want to know if I could go back and find out what buildings were there, were they multi-unit buildings, who lived there, and you can do that. It's a lot of work, but it can be done. You know, I'd be really wanting to look at the specifics of where she was discovered exactly, like within as many feet as I can, and things like that. So this is a tough place because it's pretty desolate.
2 questions. One for each of you is, at any given time, how many murders could a homicide detective be looking at once?
It varied from 13 to 25, 30 at times. But then, you know, because I worked on a cold case, I would take on a lot of cases.
So there is a perception that if you're poor or if you're black, that the police don't care as much about the murder. As a black detective, can you give the other side of the table?
Yeah, well, I get the other side of the table, and some of that is accurate, you know. So I'm not here, you know. I mean, I love the police department, you know. I mean, it's gas, but I tell people all the time, but I'm not a spokesman for the police department. I mean, you know, there's some dog asses on the police department, some dog asses at the post office. Why you didn't get your mail on time? You know, that exists in every line of work. The police just seem to be highlighted and spotlighted more and stuff, obviously, and you know, for good reason in some cases.
I mean, does it kind of blow your mind that someone could potentially get away with killing 50, 60, 70 women and not get caught?
Yeah, it saddens me because it's like, how can you take a job and, you know, say not even care about doing it properly, and especially when it comes to, you know, human life and women.
If you could say a message to the Chicago Police Department, what would you tell them?
I would just tell them, like, if it's possible, you take a second, you know, look, you know, I know you got other things going on and other things that you do, but this is just important.
If you could sit across from the strangler, what would you say to the guy?
Yeah, I would just ask, like, why? Like, took my mom away, like, and it's crazy asking that because it reminds me of a conversation I had with my dad when I was younger. Do the person, you know, you feel like the person who did it, you know, do they deserve to die or whatever? And I was telling him, like, no, I don't feel like, you know, they deserve to die or whatever. And, you know, I was young back then and stuff like that. But I, you know, now that I'm older, you know, adult, you know, I kind of still feel the same way, you know.
Did listening to detectives talk today change your perception at all?
Yeah, I know they have a hard job to do, but, you know, I just still can't, I still hold resentment towards them or whatever because it is my mom, and I feel like they didn't do everything that they could have done to try to solve the case, and I feel like the case wasn't too complex. It was things that I feel like that could have been done that wasn't done, like, and I feel like they didn't care because of race. And
do you think closure would make you feel better?
Yes, closure would definitely make me feel better. It won't bring justice because my mom isn't here, but definitely just knowing, you know, what happened and why, you know, it happened and why they did this. Even if they say, like, oh, I did it because I was high or something, you know, I'll take that. I'd rather, you know what I'm saying, have, you know what I'm saying, partially something on the plate than nothing at all, you know.
Folks, the reality is there are still many cases, upwards of 50 to 70 women, that have not been solved. And our goal is to bring some closure to these cases. So if you have any connections to the Indiana Department of Corrections or ways of speaking to Darren Dion Van or know anything about these murders that might help solve them, please reach out to me at TommyGMcGee123@gmail.com because our goal is to help these cases become solved. And perhaps with you, the audience, we can crowdsource this happening. So email me, reach out if you have any leads. Thank you for joining me on this episode, and see you next week.